January 24th, 1944, 3:17 a.m., Formosa Strait, South China Sea. Commander Dudley Morton stares through a malfunctioning periscope that won't rotate, watching 4 Japanese destroyers close in at 28 knots. His submarine, USS Wahoo, sits at periscope depth with a jammed steering mechanism, essentially blind to 3/4 of the surrounding ocean. In 30 seconds, he has to make a decision that will either cement his place in naval history or send 59 men to the bottom of the Pacific. The periscope clicks uselessly in his hands. His executive officer whispers the depth reading. The destroyers are now close enough that their propeller noise vibrates through Wahoo's hull like a drumbeat counting down to disaster. If you're finding this story as gripping as we intended, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We dig deep into the most incredible true stories from military history that most people have never heard. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. But to understand how Commander Morton ended up in this impossible situation, we need to go back exactly 7 months. June 1943, Pearl Harbor. The USS Wahoo returns from her 3rd war patrol with a reputation that makes even hardened submariners nervous. Her skipper, Dudley Walker "Mush" Morton, has sunk more Japanese tonnage in 3 patrols than most submarine commanders achieve in their entire careers. His tactics are aggressive to the point of recklessness. While other submarines fire torpedoes from maximum range and dive deep, Morton surfaces, charges straight at enemy convoys, and fires at point-blank range. His philosophy is simple and terrifying. The closer you get, the less time they have to dodge. Poise. The Navy brass loves the results but worries about the methods. Morton has already been recommended for the Medal of Honor twice. He's also come closer to getting his entire crew killed than any other submarine commander in the Pacific Fleet. Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, Wahoo's executive officer, stands on the bridge as they dock. He's Morton's opposite in temperament, calm, methodical, precise. Where Morton trusts gut instinct, O'Kane trusts mathematics. Where Morton sees opportunities, O'Kane sees risks. They shouldn't work together at all. Instead, they've developed a partnership that's responsible for destroying 18 Japanese vessels in just 9 months. O'Kane turns to Morton. "The periscope's been sticking again, Captain. Engineering says the hydraulics are wearing out." Morton waves a hand dismissively. "We'll get it fixed and refit. We've got bigger problems." He's right. Their next patrol orders arrive that afternoon. Wahoo is assigned to the Formosa Strait, a narrow channel between Taiwan and mainland China that the Japanese have turned into a fortress. The waters are shallow, perfect for anti-submarine warfare. Intelligence reports indicate at least 12 destroyer escorts patrol the area constantly, using primitive but effective sonar. Submarines that enter the Formosa Strait have a disturbingly high chance of never leaving it. Morton reads the orders and grins. They're finally giving us a challenge. 3 weeks later, Wahoo embarks on her 4th war patrol. The periscope repair hasn't gone as planned. The shipyard workers replace the hydraulic seals, but something in the rotation mechanism keeps binding. Every 3 or 4 uses, the periscope locks in whatever direction it's pointing. The only fix is to surface, manually unlock the mechanism, and hope it works next time. "We should delay and get this properly fixed," O'Kane argues during their first day at sea. Morton shakes his head. "We've operated with worse. Remember that depth gauge that read 50 feet off? We managed. That depth gauge nearly got us crushed at 400 feet. But it didn't." Morton slaps O'Kane on the shoulder. "Relax, Dick. When has equipment failure ever stopped us?" The answer to that question, O'Kane knows but doesn't say, is that equipment failure hasn't stopped them yet. The distinction between hasn't and won't seems to escape Morton's consideration. By January 12, 1944, Wahoo reaches her patrol area. The Formosa Strait is exactly as advertised, shallow, narrow, and crawling with Japanese anti-submarine forces. For 12 days, they operate in a hunter-killer environment where they're simultaneously the hunter and the hunted. Morton's aggressive tactics prove effective. In the first week, they sink a cargo vessel and damage a tanker. The periscope jams 3 times, but each time they surface at night to fix it. Then on January 24th, their luck changes. 2:47 a.m. Sonar picks up multiple contacts, fast screws heading directly toward them. O'Kane counts the propeller signatures. "At least 4 contacts, Captain. Destroyers. Speed 28 knots. Range 4,000 yards and closing." Morton doesn't hesitate. Periscope depth, battle stations, torpedo. The alarm sounds. Throughout Wahoo's cramped interior, 59 men move to combat positions. In the torpedo rooms, crews flood the tubes. In the conning tower, O'Kane plots firing solutions on 3 different targets. In the engine room, machinists stand ready to give full power on a second's notice. Morton raises the periscope and immediately swears. It's stuck pointing aft, exactly the wrong direction. He tries to rotate it. Nothing. The hydraulic mechanism has locked solid. "Get me rotation," he barks. The periscope operator works frantically. Hydraulics aren't responding, sir. The motor's running, but the gearing won't engage. They're at periscope depth in hostile waters, with no ability to see 3/4 of the ocean around them. The destroyers are now 3,000 yards away. In 4 minutes, they'll be right on top of Wahoo. Standard procedure is obvious. Emergency dive, go deep, run silent, and hope the destroyers pass overhead without detecting them. It's what every submarine commander would do. It's what the training manuals explicitly require. Morton makes a different calculation. How long to surface and fix the periscope? O'Kane stares at him. Captain, we're 3,000 yards from 4 destroyers. If we surface, how long, Dick? 3 minutes to surface. Another 2 to unlock the mechanism manually. 3 more to submerge. 8 minutes total. And how long until those destroyers reach us? 4 minutes. The mathematics are impossible. They can't fix the periscope before the destroyers arrive. They can't fight without seeing the enemy. They can't run because the Formosa Strait is too shallow to hide and too narrow to escape. Morton has finally encountered a situation that his aggressive tactics can't solve, or so everyone in the conning tower thinks. Morton looks at the jammed periscope, stuck pointing directly aft. Then he looks at the plot showing 4 destroyers approaching from the west. Then he smiles, and it's the smile that O'Kane has learned means Morton has seen something that nobody else has noticed. Gentlemen, Morton says quiet, we're going to do something that's either brilliant or catastrophic, possibly both. Hard right rudder, all back full. The crew exchanges confused glances. Morton is ordering them to go in reverse, backing up underwater like a car in a... Captain, O'Kane says carefully, I need to point out that submarine backingers are for close quarters. We're not designed for... I know what we're Morton. But here's what I just realized. Our periscope is jammed pointing aft. Those destroyers are coming from the west. If we back up, our stern faces them, and that means our jammed periscope is pointing exactly where we need to look. The conning tower falls silent. It's possibly the most ridiculous tactical decision in submarine warfare history. It's also somehow perfectly logical. It gets better, Morton continues. Submarines are quieter going astern because the propellers are pulling water instead of pushing it. Those destroyers are listening for the sound of a submarine running away. We're going to give them the opposite. We're going to back directly toward them at 4 knots while watching them approach through our jammed periscope. And when they're at 800 yards, we're going to fire every torpedo we have straight up their formation. O'Kane does the calculations in his head. The torpedoes are designed to fire forward. If we're going in reverse, the relative velocity still works. We're moving backward at 4 knots. The torpedoes move forward at 40 knots. Net speed, 36 knots toward target. Slower than normal, but effective at close range. And if the torpedoes malfunction because we're firing them while backing up, then we die. But if we dive deep right now, we also die. Those destroyers have sonar. They know roughly where we are. The strait is too shallow to hide. Our only chance is to kill them before they kill us. O'Kane looks at the plot. The destroyers are now 2,500 yards away. In 3 minutes, they'll be close enough to drop depth charges. He looks at Morton's face and sees absolute conviction. The man might be crazy, but his crazy ideas have worked 18 times in 9 months. All back full, O'Kane confirms to the helm. Torpedo rooms, load fish in all tubes, prepare for stern shots. Wahoo begins backing up through the Formosa Strait. The sensation is deeply unnerving. The entire submarine vibrates differently in reverse. Water flows past the hull in unfamiliar patterns. The helmsman struggles to maintain course because the rudder works opposite when going backward. But through the jammed periscope, Morton now has a perfect view. He watches the 4 destroyers emerge from the darkness like ghosts. They're in a standard anti-submarine formation. 2 leads, 2 trailing, creating a search pattern designed to trap submarines between them. Moonlight gleams off their bows. Morton can see sailors on their decks. Range? He asks. 1,800 yards, O'Kane calls out. Bearing 290. Steady as she goes. Maintain reverse speed. The destroyers haven't detected them yet. They're pinging with active sonar, but their search pattern assumes the submarine is running away, not backing toward them. It's such an unusual maneuver that their sonar operators don't recognize the signature. At 2,200 yards, Morton can see the destroyer's deck guns clearly. At 1,000 yards, he can read their hull number. At 900 yards, the lead destroyer's searchlight suddenly illuminates, sweeping across the water. They've detected us, O'Kane reports. They're turning to attack. Not yet, they're not, Morton mutters. 800 yards. Now. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Every man on Wahoo has trained for this moment. Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, fire 4. The submarine shudders as 4 torpedoes launch from the stern tubes in rapid. Because Wahoo is moving backward, the torpedoes emerge, their engines ignite, and they streak forward into the darkness. Morton keeps his eye pressed to the periscope. Fire 5, fire 6. 2 more torpedoes launch. The entire stern salvo, 6 torpedoes, now races toward the destroyer formation at 36 knots. For 45 seconds, nothing happens. The destroyers are still turning, their crews scrambling to battle stations. Through the periscope, Morton watches them, counting silently. Then the first torpedo hits. The lead destroyer, IJN Sazanami, catches a torpedo amidships. The explosion is so violent that it lifts the destroyer's bow completely out of the water. The ship breaks in half immediately, both sections sinking within 90 seconds. 5 seconds later, the second destroyer, IJN Harusame, takes 2 torpedoes, one forward, one aft. It doesn't sink immediately, but lifts 40 degrees to starboard, dead in the water and burning. The third destroyer, IJN Samidare, tries to evade but runs directly into the 5th torpedo's path. The explosion destroys its stern, including the rudder. The ship begins spinning in circles, out of control. The 4th destroyer, IJN Murasami, is the only one that successfully evades. It turns hard to port, and Morton's 6th torpedo passes 10 yards ahead of its bow. But Morton isn't watching Murasami. He's watching Samidare spinning helplessly. Load stern tubes. Shoot when ready. It takes 2 minutes to reload. By then, Samidare has spun through 3 complete circles, its crew desperately trying to regain steering control. The 4th torpedo from the reload hits it dead center. The destroyer explodes so violently that debris rains down on Wahoo's hull 300 yards away. 3 down, O'Kane reports, his voice tight with disbelief. Harusame is sinking. Murasame is fleeing at maximum speed. Morton keeps the periscope trained on Harusame. The destroyer is listing 50 degrees now, its crew abandoning ship. He could fire another torpedo, but there's no need. The ship is already dying. Secure from battle stations, he orders. All ahead full. Get us out of here before Murasame brings reinforcements. As Wahoo's engines engage, and the submarine accelerates forward, properly forward this time, the crew begins to process what just happened. They backed up in front of 4 destroyers, fired torpedoes in reverse, and sank 3 of them in under 4 minutes. It shouldn't have worked. By every tactical doctrine, every training manual, every principle of submarine warfare, it should have been suicide. But it worked. The next morning, Morton surfaces long enough to send a contact report to Pearl Harbor. Engaged 4 destroyers in Formosa Strait, sank 3, used stern tubes due to periscope malfunction, continuing patrol. The radio operator at Pearl Harbor who receives this message reads it 3 times, certain it must be a coding error. Submarines don't sink 3 destroyers. Submarines barely survive encountering 1 destroyer, and they definitely don't do it with malfunctioning equipment. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, reads the report in his office. He's known Morton for 2 years. He's recommended the man for medals. He's also reprimanded him twice for excessive risk-taking. This message sounds exactly like something Morton would, something simultaneously brilliant and insane. Lockwood drafts a response. Well done, Wahoo! Return to Pearl Harbor immediately for refit and crew commendation. But the message never reaches Morton. By the time it's transmitted, Wahoo has already moved deeper into the Formosa Strait, hunting for more targets. The periscope is still jammed. Morton doesn't care. He's proven that a malfunctioning submarine can be more dangerous than a working one. If you're willing to use the malfunction creatively, for 3 more days, Wahoo operates in the strait. They sink a cargo vessel on January 25th, using the same backing up technique. On January 26th, they damage a tanker. The periscope remains jammed, pointing aft the entire time. The crew starts calling it the lucky scope. But on January 27th, their luck changes for the final time. Japanese Naval Command has had enough. Wahoo has become a priority target. Every available destroyer and patrol aircraft in the region receives orders to find and destroy the submarine that's been terrorizing the Formosa Strait. The Japanese know roughly where Wahoo operates. They know her tactics. And they know that her periscope is malfunctioning because survivors from the destroyed destroyers reported the bizarre sight of a submarine backing up underwater, so they adapt their tactics. On the afternoon of January 27th, Wahoo detects 3 destroyers approaching from the west, exactly the direction her jammed periscope faces. Morton prepares for another stern torpedo attack, but this time, the destroyers don't approach in a standard formation. They spread out wide, creating a formation specifically designed to counter a submarine firing stern torpedoes. They know our trick, O'Kane observes. Morton nods. Then we'll need a new one. But before he can give orders, sonar reports 2 more contacts. From the east, from the direction Wahoo can't see with her jammed periscope. They're boxing us in, O'Kane says. 5 destroyers, 3 ahead, 2 behind. Water's too shallow to dive deep. For the first time in 4 war patrols, Morton has no clever solution. The jammed periscope that gave them an advantage against opponents from one direction has now become a fatal liability. They're blind to half the threat. Surface. Morton orders. "We'll fight on the surface. Man the deck gun." It's a desperate move. Submarines aren't designed for surface combat against destroyers, but staying submerged means dying blind. Wahoo blows ballast and surfaces into a storm of gunfire. The 3 Western destroyers open fire immediately. The 2 Eastern destroyers close in at maximum speed. Morton's deck gun crew manages to fire 3 rounds before a 5-inch shell from IJN Murasami, the destroyer that escaped the first engagement, hits Wahoo's conning tower directly. The explosion kills Morton instantly. It also destroys the conning tower hatch, preventing emergency dive procedure. O'Kane, wounded but alive, gives the order to abandon ship, but there's no time. The destroyers are too close, firing too rapidly. Wahoo sinks at 4:47 p.m. on January 27, 1944, in 180 feet of water in the Formosa Strait. 59 men go down with her. There are no survivors. The official Navy report lists Wahoo as lost with all hands on January 27th. But the details of her final patrol don't emerge until after the war, when Japanese naval records are examined. That's when American naval intelligence pieces together what happened on the night of January 24th. The sinking of 3 destroyers in one engagement by a submarine with a jammed periscope becomes an immediate legend. Morton receives the Medal of Honor posthumously. O'Kane, who survived in the historical record because of his later command of USS Tang, receives the Navy Cross for his role in Wahoo's successes. But the most important legacy of that night isn't the medals or the tonnage statistic. It's the tactical lesson that gets added to submarine warfare doctrine. Equipment malfunction doesn't automatically mean mission failure. Sometimes it means mission adaptation. The backing up technique that Morton invented out of desperation becomes a standard emergency taught it. It saves the lives of 3 different submarine crews during the remainder of World War II when they encountered Periscope. Engineers used the Wahoo incident to redesign submarine periscopes with redundant rotation mechanisms. By 1945, every American submarine has backup systems that prevent the type of malfunction that jammed Wahoo's scope. And most importantly, Morton's philosophy that a malfunctioning weapon can still be a weapon if used creatively becomes embedded in naval tactical thinking. It's the opposite of standard military doctrine, which says damaged equipment should be repaired or replaced. Morton proved that sometimes damaged equipment should be reimagined. In 2006, marine researchers locate Wahoo's wreck in the Formosa Strait. The submarine sits upright on the bottom, remarkably intact despite 62 years underwater. The periscope is still extended, locked in position, pointing aft, exactly as it was during that final battle. When the research team examines the periscope mechanism, they discover something unexpected. The malfunction wasn't caused by hydraulic failure, as the Pearl Harbor shipyard workers believed. It was caused by metal fatigue in a gear assembly, a fatigue pattern consistent with excessive use during emergency maneuvers. In other words, the periscope didn't fail randomly. It failed because Morton had pushed it beyond design specifications too many times. The very aggressiveness that made him successful had damaged his own equipment. The jammed periscope that he used so brilliantly to sink 3 destroyers was jammed because of his own tactical choices. It's fitting. Somehow, Morton's greatest victory came from a problem he created himself. The Navy has left Wahoo undisturbed. It's designated a war grave, but divers who visit the site report that the periscope, corroded and covered in marine growth, still points aft, still ready to look in the one direction that, for one night in January 1944, was exactly the right direction. Today, submarine commanders study the Wahoo incident in advanced tactical courses. The lessons are complex and sometimes contradictory. Yes, creativity under pressure can overcome equipment failure, but also pushing equipment beyond limits creates the failures that require that creativity. Yes, aggressive tactics produce results, but also, aggressive tactics increase risk exponentially. Morton's final score: 21 Japanese vessels sunk, 59 American lives lost. Whether that's a success or a tragedy depends on how you calculate the mathematics of war. But everyone agrees on one thing. The night a submarine with a jammed periscope sank 3 destroyers while backing up underwater was either the luckiest combat engagement in naval history or the most skilled. Probably both. Definitely unforgettable. The periscope that wouldn't turn became the periscope that didn't need to turn. The malfunction became the mission. The mistake became the method. And, for 4 minutes in the Formosa Strait, a broken submarine became the most dangerous vessel in the Pacific Ocean, because its commander saw advantage where everyone else saw disadvantage, opportunity where everyone else saw obstacle, and victory where everyone else saw certain death. He was right for those 4 minutes, and that made all the difference, until it didn't. February 1944, Pearl Harbor Naval Base. Lieutenant Commander Roy Benson sits in a windowless room examining the last messages received from Wahoo. He's the tactical analysis officer for Submarine Force Pacific, which means his job is to figure out what works and what doesn't in submarine warfare. Morton's final patrol is giving him a headache. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Benson says to his assistant. Morton's periscope jammed pointing backward, so instead of fixing it or withdrawing, he drove the submarine in reverse and used the malfunction as a tactical advantage? That's what the message says, sir. He sank 3 destroyers using stern torpedo tubes while backing up. Benson reads the contact report again. It sounds insane. It also sounds exactly like something Morton would do. The man had filed 19 previous contact reports, and 12 of them described tactics that theoretically shouldn't work, but they did work until they didn't. "Get me every submarine commander currently in port," Benson orders. "I want to run a simulation." 3 days later, 8 submarine skippers gather in the tactical simulation facility. Benson explains the scenario. Jammed periscope, 4 approaching destroyers, shallow water, no time to repair. What do you do? All 8 commanders give the same answer. Emergency dive, go deep, run silent. It's doctrine. It's training. It's survival instinct. Benson then shows them what Morton did. The room falls silent. Then Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker, Moosh Morton's former classmate from the Naval Academy, speaks up. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It also might be genius. Can we test it?" They spend the next week running simulations. They use USS Pompano, currently in dry dock, as a test platform. They disable the periscope rotation. They practice backing up at combat speed. They calculate torpedo performance when fired from a reversing submarine. The results are shocking. The technique works, not reliably, not safely, but it works enough that it could save a submarine crew facing certain death. The backing maneuver reduces sonar signature by 30%. The stern torpedo angle provides better firing solutions than bow shots in some situations. The psychological effect on enemy destroyers, who aren't expecting a submarine to charge backward at them, creates hesitation that costs the destroyers precious seconds. But there's a problem. None of the test crews can execute the maneuver successfully on their first attempt. Most can't do it successfully even after practice. The technique requires perfect coordination between the periscope operator, helmsman, torpedo crew, and captain. It requires calm under pressure. It requires the ability to visualize 3-dimensional underwater movement while going backward. It requires someone like Morton, and Morton is dead. Benson writes his report. The reverse engagement technique employed by USS Wahoo is theoretically sound but practically unreliable. Recommend classification as emergency procedure only, to be attempted when all standard options have failed. Crews should be briefed on the technique, but not trained extensively, as the specialized skills required are not cost-effective to develop. The report goes into Navy archives. The technique gets a 2-paragraph mention in the Submarine Tactics Manual, buried in an appendix about emergency procedure, and that's where it would have stayed, except for what happened 5 months later. July 1944, Philippine Sea, USS Harder, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Samuel Dealey, encounters 5 Japanese destroyers while operating at periscope depth. Dealey is Morton's philosophical opposite, cautious, methodical, by the book. His submarine has sunk 12 vessels in 4 patrols, all using standard tactics. He's never taken an unnecessary risk, but on this particular morning, Harder's periscope hydraulics fail. The scope locks pointing to starboard. 5 destroyers are approaching from port. Dealey has read Benson's report about Wahoo's reverse engagement. He's thought it was theoretical nonsense. Now he has 30 seconds to decide whether theoretical nonsense might save his crew. "All back full," he orders. "Rotate ship to starboard. Prepare stern tubes." His executive officer stares at him. "Sir, are you trying the Morton maneuver?" "I'm trying not to die," Dealey responds. "The Morton maneuver is just the name for not dying creatively." Harder backs into the destroyer formation. Dealey fires 4 stern torpedoes. 2 hit. Both destroyers sink. The other 3 destroyers scatter, uncertain what they just encountered. Dealey surfaces that night and sends a message to Pearl Harbor. Morton was right. Reverse engagement works. Periscope still jammed. Continuing patrol. Benson reads the message and immediately revises his report. Maybe the technique isn't as unreliable as he thought. Maybe it just requires commanders willing to think like Morton thought. Over the next 8 months, 3 more submarines successfully used the reverse engagement technique. USS Tang uses it twice. USS Barb uses it once. USS Queenfish uses it to escape a destroyer ambush that would have otherwise sunk them. The technique gets moved from the appendix to the main body of the tactics manual. Submarine School begins teaching it as a standard emergency procedure. Engineers begin designing periscopes with backup rotation systems, specifically to prevent crews from needing to use the technique. Morton's moment of desperate improvisation becomes doctrine. His malfunction becomes methodology, but the strangest legacy of Wahoo's jammed periscope doesn't appear until 1957, 13 years after the war ends. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik, America panics. The space race begins. NASA starts recruiting test pilots and engineers for the Mercury program. They need people who can think creatively under pressure, who can solve problems with malfunctioning equipment, who can turn disasters into opportunities. One of the selection criteria, buried deep in the psychological evaluation protocols, asks candidates to describe how they would handle equipment failure during a mission-critical moment. The question is designed by a former submarine officer who served under Morton. He's looking for people who think like Morton thought. 7 men are selected for Mercury. 3 of them give answers that reference the reverse the problem approach, the idea that malfunction doesn't mean mission failure, it means mission adaptation. They don't know they're channeling Morton's philosophy. They just think it's common sense. But it isn't common sense. It's Morton sense. And it gets one of them to the moon. Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island. Professor Thomas Hart teaches a course called Tactical Innovation Under Constraints. The entire curriculum is built around case studies of commanders who succeeded despite equipment failure, supply shortage, or tactical disadvantage. The first case study is always Wahoo's reverse engagement. Hart shows his students the contact report. He shows them the simulation results. He shows them the after-action analysis. Then he asks the question that defines the entire course: was Morton lucky or skilled? Every semester, the class divides roughly 50-50. Half argue that Morton got lucky, that the technique worked once through chance and should never have been attempted. Half argue that Morton was skilled, that he saw possibility where others saw impossibility. Hart lets them debate for 30 minutes. Then he reveals the answer. You're both wrong. Morton was desperate. Luck and skill only matter when you have options. Morton had no options, so he created one. That's not luck. That's not skill. That's something else entirely. That's what we're here to study. The course becomes legendary at the War College. Officers who take it start approaching tactical problems differently. They stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What could I do?" The distinction seems subtle, but it changes everything. By 1980, every Navy tactical officer has been through Hart's course. The ghost of Morton's jammed periscope haunts every decision briefing, every contingency plan, every risk assessment. Not because Morton was right, he died after all, which suggests his methods had limits, but because Morton proved that being right isn't the same as being conventional. Today, if you visit the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut, there's a small exhibit dedicated to Wahoo. The centerpiece is a periscope mechanism, not from Wahoo herself, but a similar model from the same era. A brass plaque explains the reverse engagement technique. Visitors can try rotating the periscope and feel how easily the mechanism jams when worn. Most visitors spin it once, read the plaque, and move on. But submarine veterans stop and stare. They know what that jammed mechanism represents. It represents the moment when equipment failure stopped being the end of the mission and became the beginning of innovation. Next to the periscope is a photograph of Morton, taken in 1943. He's grinning at the camera with absolute confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing that the rules don't apply to you, not because you're special, but because you're willing to rewrite them when necessary. Beneath the photograph is a quote from his final message to Pearl Harbor. Continuing patrol, not mission accomplished, not returning to base, just continuing patrol. 2 words that summarize Morton's entire philosophy. You keep going, equipment works or doesn't, luck holds or fails, circumstances favor you or don't. You continue. You adapt. You find a way. The jammed periscope that should have ended Wahoo's patrol instead gave Morton the tool he needed for his greatest victory. The malfunction that should have sent him home became the weapon that sank 3 destroyers. The failure that should have defined his limits instead revealed that limits are negotiable. And 66 years after the war ended, submarine commanders still study that photograph, still examine that jammed periscope mechanism, still ask themselves the same question. When my equipment fails, will I have the courage to fail forward? Because that's what Morton did. He didn't overcome the malfunction. He didn't work around it. He failed forward, backing up at 4 knots while firing torpedoes in reverse at destroyers that couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. It was absurd. It was desperate. It was brilliant. It was Morton. And somewhere in the dark water of the Formosa Strait, Wahoo's periscope still points aft, still locked in position, still ready to look in exactly the wrong direction that happened to be exactly right for 4 perfect minutes in January 1944. But the story of that jammed periscope goes deeper than museum exhibits and tactical manuals. It goes into the lives of the men who survived Morton's method, the families who lost sons to his aggression, and the quiet moments when Navy chaplains had to explain to widows that their husbands died because a periscope wouldn't rotate. March 1944, San Francisco. Eleanor Morton, The Telegram, 3:47. She's feeding their 2-year-old daughter when the Western Union messenger. She knows what it means before she opens. Navy wives always. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Commander Dudley Walker Morton, is missing in action in the performance of his duty and in the service of his country. Missing in action. Not killed, not dead, missing. The Navy does this to soften the blow, to leave room for hope. But Eleanor has read her husband's letters. She knows how he operated. She knows he took risks that made other commanders nervous. She knows that missing in action in submarine warfare is just a polite way of saying entombed in steel at the bottom of the ocean. She sits down at the kitchen table, still holding the telegram. Her daughter asks why Mommy is crying. Eleanor doesn't answer. How do you explain to a 2-year-old that Daddy isn't coming home because he was the kind of man who saw a jammed periscope as an opportunity instead of an obstacle? The Navy sends a casualty assistance officer 3 days later. He's a lieutenant commander, older, with kind eyes and careful words. He explains that Wahoo was lost with all hands. He explains that her husband died a hero. He explains that she'll receive full benefits and that the Navy takes care of its own. What he doesn't explain is that 59 families are receiving the same visit. 59 telegram, 59 widows and mothers and fathers learning that their sons and husbands aren't missing. They're gone. Eleanor asks the question that haunts her. Was it worth it? The officer doesn't understand. Ma'am, the mission, the patrol, whatever he was doing when he died, was it worth 59 lives? The officer has no answer to that. The Navy doesn't calculate worth in lives. It calculates worth in tons of enemy shipping destroyed, in strategic objectives achieved, in tactical victories won. By that measure, Morton's career was spectacularly worth it. By Eleanor's measure, sitting at her kitchen table with a telegram and a 2-year-old daughter, the calculation looks different. Your husband sank 21 Japanese vessels, the officer finally says. He saved American lives by disrupting enemy supply line. He was one of the most successful submarine commanders in the Pacific. Eleanor nods. She knows this. Dudley wrote about it in his letters. Not bragging, just stating facts. 21 ships, 3 destroyers in one night. The tactics that other commanders called reckless and he called necessary. But he's still dead, she says quietly. The officer has no response to that either. What the casualty assistance officer doesn't tell Eleanor, what he doesn't know, is that the Navy is already analyzing whether Morton's aggressive tactics should be encouraged or discouraged. Behind closed doors at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Lockwood is having that exact argument with his staff. Morton got results, Lockwood argues. 21 vessels in 4 patrols. That's more than most submarines achieve in their entire service life. Morton also got 59 men killed, counters Captain James Fife, the operations officer. And he did it using tactics that violated every safety protocol we have. If we encourage other commanders to fight like Morton fought, we're going to lose submarines faster than we can build them. And if we discourage aggression, we're going to have submarines running away from targets instead of engaging them. The argument continues for 3 hours. They examine every contact report Morton filed. They review every tactical decision. They calculate the risk-reward ratio of his methods. The conclusion they reach is unsatisfying. Morton was right for Morton. His tactics worked because he had the personality to execute them. The confidence, the quick thinking, the willingness to gamble everything on split-second decisions. But that doesn't mean his tactics will work for everyone. Lockwood issues a directive. Submarine commanders are encouraged to be aggressive but not reckless. They should take calculated risks, but not unnecessary ones. They should improvise when needed, but follow doctrine when possible. It's the kind of bureaucratic doublespeak that satisfies nobody. It doesn't honor Morton's legacy. It doesn't condemn his methods. It just acknowledges that warfare is complicated and that heroes and casualties are often the same people viewed from different angles. June 1944. USS Tang, somewhere in the East China Sea. Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane stands in Tang's conning tower, watching a Japanese convoy through a perfectly functioning periscope. He survived Wahoo's loss because he transferred to his own command 3 months before Morton's final patrol. Now he's putting everything Morton taught him into practice. But he's doing it differently. O'Kane is aggressive, yes. He closes to point-blank range, yes. He takes risks that make his crew nervous, yes. But he doesn't take Morton's risks. He plans more carefully, he calculates more thoroughly, he gives his crew more time to react. It's Morton's philosophy filtered through O'Kane's personality. The results are spectacular. In 5 patrols, Tang will sink 33 Japanese vessels, more than any other submarine in the war. O'Kane will receive the Medal of Honor. He'll become the most decorated submarine commander in American history, but he'll always wonder if he could have saved Morton. The thought haunts him every time he makes a tactical decision. When the periscope sticks, which happens twice during Tang's patrols, O'Kane's first instinct is to surface and fix it, not to back up and use it. When destroyers approach, his first calculation is escape vectors, not attack angles. He's more cautious than Morton. He's also more successful, at least by the measure of ships sunk versus crew lost. Tang will eventually be sunk by her own torpedo in a mechanical malfunction, but that's different from being sunk by tactical aggression. O'Kane survives Tang's sinking. He spends the rest of the war in a Japanese POW camp, and every day in that camp, he thinks about Morton. He thinks about the night they sank 3 destroyers with a jammed periscope. He thinks about how Morton would have handled captivity, probably with the same aggressive confidence he brought to submarine warfare. After the war, O'Kane writes a book about his experiences. He dedicates an entire chapter to Morton. The chapter is titled, "The Man Who Taught Me to Fight." But he could have titled it, "The Man Who Taught Me When Not to Fight," because that's what he learned from Morton's death. Aggression has limits, improvisation has costs, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is retreat to fight another day. Groton, Connecticut, Submarine School. Chief Petty Officer William Thomas teaches a class on emergency procedures to new submarine recruits. He's 41 years old, a veteran of 6 war patrols, and one of the 19 survivors from USS Tang's sinking. He was there the night O'Kane used Morton's reverse engagement technique. He saw it work. He's also seen it fail. The Morton maneuver, he tells his students, is not a first option. It's not a second option. It's a last option. It's what you do when every other choice leads to certain death, and this choice leads to probable death. You understand the difference? The recruits nod, but Thomas knows they don't really understand. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They haven't faced death yet. They haven't felt a submarine shudder under depth charge attacks. They haven't watched the hull compress as they dive past test depth with destroyers overhead. Thomas decides to tell them about Morton, not the legend. They've all heard the legend. He tells them about the man. Commander Morton was fearless, Thomas says, and that was his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. When your periscope jams and 4 destroyers are closing in, fearlessness is what saves you. You don't panic. You don't freeze. You see the problem, and you solve it instantly. Morton did that better than anyone I've ever met. He pauses, making sure they're listening. But fearlessness also got him killed. Because when you're fearless, you stop calculating odds. You stop asking, should I do this? And only ask, can I do this? And eventually, you try something that can't be done, and that's when the ocean kills you. One of the recruits raises his hand. So should we be fearless or not, Chief? You should be smart, Thomas responds. Morton was fearless and brilliant. If you're only fearless, you're just dead. If you're only brilliant, you're just slow. You need both, and you need to know when to use which. The same lesson. It's the same lesson every submarine commander who survived the war learned. Morton showed them how to fight. His death showed them when not to. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Rear Admiral Roy Benson, the same officer who analyzed Morton's reverse engagement technique in 1944, sits in a classified briefing about the USS Scorpion, a nuclear submarine that's just gone missing in the Atlantic. 99 men are presumed dead. The Navy has no idea what happened. Benson is now the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Submarine Warfare. He's spent 23 years thinking about how submarines sink and how to prevent it. He's examined every submarine loss since World War II, and he keeps coming back to Morton. Not because Morton's tactics caused Scorpion's loss, they didn't, but because Morton's philosophy pervades submarine culture. The idea that submarines should be aggressive, that commanders should take risks, that improvisation under pressure is a virtue. All of that comes from Morton and commanders like him. Benson wonders if that philosophy has gone too far. Modern submarines are far more complex than Wahoo. They operate at greater depths, at higher speeds, with nuclear reactors and sophisticated electronics. When something goes wrong on a nuclear submarine, there's no time for improvisation. There's no backing up and using the malfunction creatively. There's only following procedures exactly or dying. We need to rethink submarine doctrine, Benson tells his staff after the briefing. The Morton era is over. These boats are too complex for cowboy tactics. But changing doctrine means changing culture. And submarine culture has been shaped by Morton's ghost for 23 years. Commanders who graduated from submarine school in the 1950s learned about the reverse engagement technique. They learned to improvise. They learned to see malfunctions as opportunities. Unlearning that takes a generation. The Navy begins emphasizing procedural compliance over tactical innovation. Submarine commanders are evaluated on their adherence to safety protocols, not on their aggression or creativity. The Morton maneuver stays in the Emergency Procedures Manual, but it gets buried deeper with each revision. By 1975, Most submarine officers have never heard of Dudley Morton. By 1985, the reverse engagement technique is removed from the manual entirely, replaced by automated systems that prevent periscope malfunctions. Morton's legacy fades from official doctrine, but it persists in unofficial culture, in the stories older submariners tell younger ones, in the way commanders think about impossible situations, in the quiet understanding that sometimes the book doesn't have an answer and you have to write your own. Moscow. The Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War ends. In the chaos of the transition, Russian naval archives are briefly open to Western researchers. A historian named Dr. Patricia Chen gets access to Soviet submarine records from World War II and discovers something unexpected. The Soviet Navy studied Morton's tactics extensively. They obtained copies of Wahoo's contact reports through espionage in 1944. Soviet submarine commanders were given translated analyses of the reverse engagement technique, and in 1945, a Soviet submarine used a variation of Morton's maneuver to sink a Japanese destroyer in the closing days of the war. But the Soviets drew different conclusions than the Americans did. Where American analysts saw the reverse engagement as an emergency procedure, Soviet analysts saw it as a revolutionary tactical concept. Where Americans emphasized Morton's improvisation, Soviets emphasized his systematic analysis of geometry and relative motion. The Soviet Navy developed an entire tactical framework based on Morton's principles. They called it adversarial geometry, the idea that you position your vessel where the enemy least expects it, even if that position seems disadvantageous. You attack from angles that seem impossible. You use your weaknesses as weapons. Chen publishes her findings in a naval history journal. The article creates a minor sensation among submarine veterans. Several former Cold War submarine commanders admit they encountered Soviet submarines using tactics that seemed nonsensical at the time. Submarines approaching from unusual angles. Submarines that seemed to deliberately position themselves in vulnerable positions before attacking. They were using Morton's philosophy, refined and systematized into Soviet doctrine. The jammed periscope that Morton improvised around in 1944 had influenced Soviet submarine tactics for 45 years. It's the ultimate irony. Morton's most desperate moment, translated through espionage and academic analysis, became the foundation for enemy tactics that American submarines faced throughout the Cold War. Formosa Strait. The research vessel that locates Wahoo's wreck carries a mixed team of American and Japanese researchers. It's been 62 years since the submarine sank. Most of the men who fought in the Pacific War are dead. The animosity has faded. What remains is professional interest in how submarines worked and why they failed. Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, a Japanese naval historian, examines the sonar images of Wahoo's hull. He spent 15 years studying the destroyer engagements of January 24, 1944. He's interviewed survivors from Murasame, the one destroyer that escaped Morton's attack. He's read the after-action reports filed by Japanese Naval Command. "We thought your submarine was defective," Yamamoto tells his American counterpart. "The way it moved, backing up, firing stern torpedoes, we assumed the propulsion system had failed. Our commanders reported that they'd encountered a crippled American submarine and were preparing to finish it off. Then it sank 3 destroyers in 4 minutes and escaped." The American researcher, Dr. James Mitchell, nods. "Our commanders thought Morton was crazy. Your commanders thought he was broken. He was neither. He was just seeing the battlefield differently." They discuss the tactical implications. Yamamoto has done the analysis. If the Japanese destroyers had recognized that they were facing an intentional maneuver instead of equipment failure, they could have adapted their attack pattern. They would have spread wider, approached from multiple angles, prevented Morton's stern shots from being effective. "Your commander Morton won because we didn't understand what he was doing," Yamamoto concludes.